nothing short of a rehaul of the Aadhaar system. After raising privacy and security concerns over the vulnerabilities in Aadhaar, the UIDAI has decided to implement a new method of identification that protects the user's Aadhaar number. Now, instead of giving your Aadhaar number as identity proof, you will have to provide a virtual ID that will be generated each time. It is a random number and it's not possible to get the Aadhaar number from this virtual ID. Apart from this, there are new restrictions of which agencies can keep and store Aadhaar numbers. A UID token will be used for those entities that are not allowed to store Aadhaar numbers. Importantly, the UID token will make sure databases are not merged. Remember, that was a big concern. So is this version of Aadhaar safer? And do the changes assuage concerns about privacy? To talk about this, I'm joined this evening by Nikhil Kumar of the iSpirit Foundation and cyber law advocate Pawan Duggal. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening on Primetime Debate. Mr. Duggal, do you think that this is good enough? Because if you remember what the primary concerns were, that your Aadhaar number is available very easily, your Aadhaar number is linked to a lot of key information about you, and there are often private and third-party vendors who have access to it. Now, this new system effectively cuts all of that out?
Well, as a concept, the concept of virtual identity seems attractive, but the devil is going to be in the detail. It will have to be yet seen what kind of technical parameters will have to be fulfilled at the back end so as to protect not just data privacy, but also personal privacy of individuals. Also, the current today's statement does not give the slightest of clues of what kind of cyber security parameters and essential elements have been incorporated as part of this virtual identity. Well, this concept of virtual identity looks very good, but the question is, it's going to be ultimately based on access to the Aadhaar website. Now, in a country where web literacy is not very high, expecting that all Indians are going to jump onto the UIDAI website to create this virtual identity token is a tall task. Further, this entire issue is not yet legally tested in the sense that the Aadhaar Act 2016 does not provide legal sanctity or validity to the concept of a virtual identity. So I think while this is good news, the current statement comes in as an implicit admission by the UIDAI for the first time in its history that yes, Aadhaar numbers are being leaked, are being stored by various stakeholders on their systems, and it's time to go ahead and beef the Aadhaar ecosystem. But please understand, you have given yourself a timeline of about 4 months to which you will transmigrate onto the new system. The requisite foundations on which the system is based has to be seen. Further, you have to be alive of the fact that large number of people have unauthorized access to the Aadhaar database, which means that the said unauthorized access can also be used for the purposes of regenerating false or fabricated virtual identities, which ultimately may render the entire thing not very effective. So I think we'll have to wait for more details from the UIDAI in terms of the technicalities, the cyber security issues, and the legalities before we can really comment. But this statement actually represents a fundamental landmark shift in the thinking of the UIDAI.
And absolutely, it's a different system.
Approach
it's a different system.
You're right. Given up.
Sure, you're right, Mr. Duggal. It's a different system on how Aadhaar will be implemented. I just want to make one clarification because I've had a chance to look at that circular, and you mentioned that, will all users be able to go to the Aadhaar app or to the portal and generate their Aadhaar? But just to clarify, the circular does say all agencies using Aadhaar authentication and eKYC services shall ensure Aadhaar number holders can provide the 16-digit VID within their application. So one assumes from this very broadly that every agency which is collecting your Aadhaar, be it a bank or a telecom provider, service provider, whoever, will have to give you some option of generating that Aadhaar number within their setup as well, which will possibly make it easier. Nikhil Kumar also joins us. He's been a defender of Aadhaar. Nikhil, one question which has been raised, and this is a quote from Pranesh Prakash a little while earlier, is why keep it voluntary? Why not make it mandatory? Why not make it mandatory so that even citizens who may not be aware of possible misuse of their Aadhaar number are protected?
See, this is the issue with people. When something is mandatory, they say, why isn't it voluntary? When something is made voluntary, people say, why isn't it made mandatory? I think what is the right design for any system to be done is give the option back to the user, and the user will decide what is right for him. To debunk what Mr. Pawan Dugal said, he's completely wrong in making an assertion to say that people will not have access to generate the VID. As you clearly mentioned in the 6th point issued in the circular today, UIDI very clearly says that UIDI will provide various options to the Aadhaar number holder to generate their VID, to retrieve their VID, and this will be done via the resident portal. It will be done via Aadhaar Enrollment Center, M-Aadhaar mobile application, and more such. So I think giving this feature back to the user will allow the user to use it the way he wants. I don't think it's the right design to make anything mandatory because there are 400 to 500 million people who do not have access to the internet or phones, as we know. So we should take this as we go along. I think what is more important today is we should commend the government, we should commend UIDI for coming out with design system. This arguably makes Aadhaar the most sophisticated digital identity system in the world. Virtual IDs have been spoken about in theory for a long time. Implementing this in real time, going live in the next 4 months, we should now as an ecosystem come together, help UIDI implement this rather than sit and criticize whether they are.
May I just come in there? While we commend the government for action, as you said, and rightly so, isn't this an admission that there was a problem? Because, you know, we've spoken about Aadhaar most of this week on Primetime Debate. It's been in the news, right from the Tribune article to the, you know, RBI affiliated organization study. And there were clear signs that there was a problem. But through all of it, the response has always been, where is the breach? Where is the issue? What has happened? No one had the biometrics. At the very least, Nikhil, today you will be sporting enough to admit that there was a problem and UIDA has recognized that problem and now has sought to fix it.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it will be naive to say that the solution is a knee-jerk solution. As I understand, this has been in works for a long time. As Nandan Nilekani, who was the first chairman of UIDI, in an interview said, the concept of virtual ID is not new. This was spoken about in a paper in 2010. However, the time was not right. This has been in works for some time. I think more than I think we should definitely look at this with the right spirit to say that it's not about, it's not about saying whether they've admitted to something wrong. Is this the need of the hour? Will this improve security? Will this improve privacy? And please note, any digital system or any software is a continuous evolution process. And I would actually laud this as an innovation rather than a stopgap fix.
Sure. Pawan Dugal, I just want your comment on a couple of points. One is limited KYC, where UIDAI will now separate authentication agencies into global and local. From what I've gone through in the circular, it's not very clear on what parameters they'll decide who is global and who is local, and who should be allowed to keep the Aadhaar numbers and who should not. Do you think that that is something which needs more clarity?
I think this entire circular is only a mother statement document. It does not have any adequate details, either in terms of technicalities or in terms of cyber security or the other specific details which are going to actually populate the entire ecosystem. Well, the question of the matter is, at the end of the day, the devil will be in the detail. So when you're talking of this distinction between global versus local authorities and which is going to be allowed access versus which is not, again, you are coming up with a subjective interpretation. The question is there a guarantee that the global guys will be far more protected than the Indian guys? Will there be any kind of mechanisms to help us define how to demarcate between the global versus the local? So I think all these is ultimately a matter of detail. So while there's a lot of rejoicing happening that virtual identities is great and India should rejoice, the fact remains it's a good concept, but then it's too early to even comment right now. So merely debunking each other doesn't going to help. At the end of the day, the UIDI has still held its cards very close to its chest. It's not come out in the public domain as to what its exact day-to-day mechanism or process is going to be. I'm not so sure for a student like me on Aadhaar to know how this virtual identities will be granted legalities, number one. Number two, how will it actually ensure that cyber security breaches are adequately prevented? And finally, people still have access to unauthorized access to Aadhaar, which can be used for the purposes of misusing the virtual identity. Please understand, we are not just talking about the Aadhaar central identities data repository, we're talking about the ecosystem, which is completely unsafe. And it's a much bigger challenge going forward when we talk of virtual identities in an unsecure Aadhaar ecosystem.
Yeah, Mr. Duggal, I just want to ask you about the unique tokens because if you remember, the biggest fear was the merging of the database. That once you have someone's Aadhaar number and access to the database, you know their telephone number, you know their bank account number, you know their PAN card, you know everything about them. Now, because of this system, agencies will not be able to merge databases. That means every agency will not have every kind of detail. That's where limited KYC also comes in. Will that not be a big relief to a prime concern?
I don't understand from where are you reading this. I don't find that anywhere specifically written in the circular.
It's point number 11 in the circular, page 4.
This is only talking about virtual identities and the fact that it will be disposal. Yeah. Yeah, when you look at point number 11, it's obviously very clear that they have just tried to give broad directions. How will it actually work on the ground? How are you going to divest authorities who already have their Aadhaars onto their systems? How is the Aadhaar going to be destroyed? What is going to be the relevant ramifications in terms of retention of such unauthorized Aadhaar sister numbers which are existing on the platforms of various stakeholders? In fact, this circular is clearly recognized that there's a misuse of the saving of Aadhaar numbers on various platforms by service providers. So I think this requires a more holistic approach. It's good development in the sense that Aadhaar is looking at alternate ways like virtual identity. But again, too early to really comment because the Aadhaar march forward towards the complete transformation into a virtual identity will have to be beefed up with appropriate details.
I want to take that point to Nikhil as a last comment. 4 more months before this is implemented, so far nearly all of the population, 86% plus of the population has an Aadhaar number and has been giving it liberally everywhere. Isn't it like shutting the doors after the horse is bolted, Nikhil? What happens to all of the data which is floating out there?
No, absolutely not. First of all, let me clarify. Global AUAs and local AUAs doesn't mean it's a foreign entity or a local entity. It's just two categories. I would request the panelists to please read through the circular in detail and not spread confusion amongst the viewers. Number two, on your question specifically on is it too late? I think the use case for Aadhaar has been largely in government using Aadhaar for various different services. As you know, there has been an approach to link various different government schemes with Aadhaar, and the objective of doing that was to basically remove ghosts and so on and so forth. But I actually would argue to say that the real use of Aadhaar would be by the private ecosystem. It will be the startups who are going to build new financial inclusion products. It will be, the government who are trying to build health inclusion products. I think we should not be delusional and keep talking about use words like privacy, cyber security, and so on and so forth. And forget about all the other people in India. There are 1 billion people in India. 600 million people in India don't have access to sanitation. 700 million people in India.
Just to put things in perspective, the Supreme Court today commented on Aadhaar being used for shelter homes and asked why those who don't have an Aadhaar should be kept out. Are they not Indians? So, one thing I really see in an Aadhaar debate, and whenever I do one, is how hardened the positions are on either side. Maybe there is some middle ground. Hopefully we can find it. Thank you so much, Nikhil Kumar and Pawan Duggal, for joining us this evening on the second primetime debate. And before we go, a couple of comments that have come in. Thank you so much, all of you who are watching and writing in. We really appreciate it. So Sampak Kranti says on Facebook, no matter if it is a 2-stage or a 3-4-stage security system, it is worthless. Well, he's not too happy. A couple of comments on Air India as well. which have come in. Prabir Kumar Chakravarti says we need a public sector company to protect cartels of private sector. Private sector isn't efficient exclusively. Free it from political interferences. Well, that's a tough one as far as Air India is concerned. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening on Primetime Debate. Stay tuned to BloombergQuint.com.